Okay, for our very first lecture here, I'm going to tell the end of the story. Evaluating offensive linemen, we're going to talk about round value. This is what's done when you put a final grade on a player. And you kind of decide, okay, he's a first rounder, he's a second rounder, he's a third rounder, he's a bottom of the second, he's a middle of the first, he's an end of the fifth. To me, that was always the hardest thing that coaches and scouts had to do. Whenever I had a new coach or a new scout to work with, they'd go through the process, they'd check all the boxes, they'd grade all the different characteristics and traits, they'd grade the film and all that. And then when they got ready to put a round value on the guy, they'd like stress out. They'd sit there and they'd stare and they'd go, I don't know, is he a third round, a second round, first round? I don't know what he is. So I'm going to give you specific definitions of what each player is. These round values are not necessarily going to be where the player is drafted. It's where you put the round value on him as a team, and you would take him at that spot in the draft. All right, so let's get started. Here we go. There's two things ultimately that determine the value of a player, and it's traits, physical traits, versus production, how well he plays. And it's that constant balance between those two entities. Sometimes coaches are accused of being too production-oriented. Sometimes scouts are accused of being too much trait-oriented. To me, real good picks are a combination of the two. And the way that balance tips, the way that scale leans one side or the other, determines the round value of the player. Okay, so here we go. I've listed here, and this is what we're going to do in this course. We're going to go through every single one of these things in detail. And we're going to come up with a system for scoring each of these things in a very clean and decisive way. Round values would be, okay, here's a trait. So we got height, weight, somatotype. I mean, what is his body like? His arm length, his hand size. What kind of feet does he have? Agility, his speed, punch, anchor, strength, hip and leg explosion, quick twitch, balance, flexibility, poise, FBI, competitiveness, character. We will talk about each one of these and determine how to put a grade on each one of those traits. Once that's done, then you get the video out, right? And or you can do it before, it doesn't matter. And I'll teach you a grading system that's based on the results of the guy, if he got his block or not. You'll look at production stats. You know, how many sacks did he give up? How many penalties did he have? What kind of fit is he to the scheme that that particular team runs? There are certain players, is he a situational player? Right? Some guys are just really good at, like an extra big tight end or an extra pass blocker in passing downs. What's his level of competition? And that's very important. I'm going to define how you adjust a player's grade based on his level of competition that he played in college. Right? And the other thing is his game experience, how much he played, how many starts he had, etc. Now, all this stuff is NFL oriented, but obviously, if I were a college coach or a college personnel man, all these things matter because ultimately I want players who will become pros because obviously if a guy is a good pro, then he certainly was a good college player. I've not known many who weren't. So we'll talk about all these things in detail in the course. We won't talk about those things right here in this first lecture, though. Okay. There's a concept we have to talk about. Are we going to grade for the league or grade for the scheme? Draftniks, if you will. Whether it's Pro Football Focus or it's Mel Kiper or anyone, typically they put a grade on a guy that would be consistent with most teams of the league in the scheme that they fit in. Well, teams do differently. Teams put a grade on a guy based on how he fits your scheme. Like here's Joe Bugle over here. They ran at the Redskins, they ran a power and pass offense, double team, knock you back off the ball. They were the Hogs. They were big and strong. They got movement. Well, the type of player that fits their scheme is very different than the coach here, Alex Gibbs, who ran a wide zone reach, cut, hustle, stretch, one cut type of offense. So you have to be very careful when you're grading for the league, or are you grading for the team? And typically coaches and scouts at the club level will grade for the scheme, where scouts who, a national scout, a Blesto scout, if you will, they will grade for what would be the typical average of the league. Okay, let's get started. We're going to go through here. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, college free agent. We're going to go through every round, and we're going to talk about what that round value grade is. All right, and the first round is the only round that's broken up into three categories, and this is typical of many teams. There's a top third of the first round, a 1A, a middle third of the first round, a 1B, and the bottom third of the first round, which is a 1C. So the first 10 picks, we're going to call a 1A. And what is a 1A? And before I read the definition, I'm going to explain this is where people get stuck. They do all their work, they've done the film, they've seen them at the combine, they've ranked them, they've charted them, they know everything, and then when they get ready to put a round grade on the guy, they don't know. So whenever I had a new coach or new scout, I would sit down with them, and we would evaluate the film together, and we would do it quietly, and then I would just start reading out all these definitions until they got to a point where they said, yeah, that's what he is. Okay, well, that's his grade. So here it is. So 1A, this is a rare player with Pro Bowl ability. Now in the next lecture, I'm going to give you examples of guys that you can watch who are 1As. All right, a tackle, a guard, and a center. And you can watch them on NFL Game Pass, right? And so a 1A is a rare player with Pro Bowl ability. He's an immediate starter as a rookie. He's only a tackle. If he's a Pro Bowl player and he's a tackle, he's a 1A. If he has gold jacket potential, meaning he's a Hall of Famer, then he can be a center or a guard. This particular player in the top third of the first round has to check all the boxes, means he has to be adequate at least at every single criteria, and he has to transcend scheme, meaning a player with a 1A, to give a player that type of grade, he has to be a Pro Bowl player for all 32 teams in the league, regardless of what their scheme is. 1B. This guy is a potential upper-level starting offensive tackle. All right, now I have that in italics, upper level. That means of the starting 32 left tackles in the league, would he be ranked from 1 to 10? All right, that's an upper level, upper third, right? And the right tackles would be an upper level offensive tackle. Typically, you give more credit to a guy who plays left tackle than right tackle. So a 1B has to be a potential, not the first day, but a potential in his first contract, an upper level starting offensive tackle, or an elite level starting guard or center. Meaning this guy has to take him in the middle of the first round, and if he's a guard or center, you're saying this guy's going to be a Pro Bowler. Right? This player will start as a rookie unless he's behind a really rare player. Okay, now we're at the bottom of the first round. 1C, picks 22 to 32. The grade you'd put on this guy, he's a potential upper-level starting guard or center. So not immediately, and not a Pro Bowler, but an upper-level starting guard or center. Or he's a solid starting offensive tackle, or in a year from now, a potential upper-level starting offensive tackle with years development. So, like I'm saying, you'd watch the film, you'd say, my God, this guy's a first-rounder, and you just keep reading those three definitions over and over. And somewhere in your mind, because you've studied players who fit in the 1A, the 1B, and the 1C category, somewhere you would say, yeah, he's like that guy. So he's a 1B, or he's a 1C, or he's a 1A. Second round. A second round player is a starting offensive guard as a rookie with the potential to be an upper level starter in his first contract. Or he's a potential starting offensive tackle and a solid starting offensive tackle in his second year. What is a solid starter? Well, upper level, we're the top third. Solid starters are the middle third, meaning if you had to rank all the tackles, he'd be somewhere, between the 11th left or right tackle and the 20th, 21st left or right tackle. So a second round pick in year 2 should be ranked somewhere in the middle of the starting offensive tackles in the league. That would be a second round pick. And once again, I'm repeating myself, but the next class I'm going to give you players that you can watch that will define what a solid starting tackle is, or a upper level starting guard or center is. In the third round. The third round, by definition, is a solid, meaning an average starter at center or guard in year 1 or 2, early in his career. Or he's a developmental tackle. What's a developmental tackle? That's a guy who has a lot of potential, rare physical ability, but doesn't really know how to play the game yet. And it's going to take time, a couple years, and a developmental tackle, you're saying within year 3, he will be a solid starter. So if you got a guy who you think, it's going to take a couple of years, but by then he's going to be an average starting tackle, all right, then he's a third round pick. The other thing is he could be a lower level starting tackle. What is that? That's a guy in the bottom third, all right, if you ranked him 1 to 32. The bottom third of the starting left tackles, the bottom third of the starting right tackles. He would be a third round pick, would be a lower level starting offensive tackle in year 1 or 2. The fourth round, a situational starter. What's a situational starter? Well, he starts because we don't have anybody else, right? You don't really want him to start, right? But he does. Or he might be playing in a specific offense, all right, that fits, but probably is limited in other areas, all right? So a situational starter means he starts, but you like to have better. Fourth round could also be a developmental player who's got NFL traits to become a solid starter by year 3. Now we're getting farther back in the first year of his contract. So a fourth round, if you think somewhere in the third or fourth year of his contract, he's going to be a solid starter, it's going to take him that long, then he's a fourth round pick. It might mean he needs to be a lot stronger, might mean he needs a lot of technique work, maybe he was from a really small school that didn't play level of competition, all right, and so that would be a fourth round pick. A fifth rounder is a solid backup player on a 53-man roster, meaning on every team in the league, he's going to be your 6th or 7th guy coming off the bench, all right? The first or second guy, because you carry 8 on Sundays with the new rules. So you got your 5 starters and then your first guy out on the field, or your second guy out on the field in case there's an injury. That would be a 5th round pick. And you can win with that guy if he plays, all right? You don't want to play too long with him, a 5th round pick, because he'll get exposed. But he can play and you can win and he won't hurt you. You'll win with him, not because of him. A 6th round pick, by definition, would be a marginal backup player on the 53-man roster. So he'd be that last guy on your roster that you're trying to replace. And he's a liability if he plays an extended amount of time. So you really don't want him out there, but you got nobody else. And, it's harder to find these guys than you think. And but that would be a 6th round pick, a marginal backup player, a guy that you're trying to replace. A 7th round pick, there's a couple 7th round pick type players. One would be a priority player for your practice squad with unusual traits, and he's going to require a lot of development. Okay, he's a guy that it's going to take him a few years, he's got some talent, and he can develop into a lower level starter or a solid backup player. All right? Or he could be replaceable backup, an end of the roster guy who's productive but just not good enough. So you'd be looking to replace him as well. A college free agent. Okay, here we go. The true grade of a college free agent, and many players make it, obviously. These are just the grades you put on a guy. The true grade of a college free agent is a player who's on the roster during camp, but he's not good enough to make the roster. So if you do your process, you go through it all. I'm going to teach you the process. I'm going to teach you how to rank all the different traits and grade the production. And if you get all finished and you decide that I watched some guys that were similar, that were CFA grade guys, then you would put him there. You'd know that he's good for camp, but he's not probably going to make the roster. A reject. A reject would be someone who lacks those abilities, obviously. You know, if you get all done and you decide, oh, no, he's not as good as those guys that were CFA graded, then no, he's not good enough. So don't waste your time on the reject. So this is what we did. We talked about all these different traits, and this course is going to go over all these traits and how you grade all these different things. All right, and then we're going to go over the production part, and then we're going to put on the scale and we're going to see the balance. And if a guy has all the traits with high numbers and all the production with high numbers, well, he's obviously a first-round pick. Those are easy. But if a guy has most of the traits and a lot of the production, well, then you know, you're talking about a second or third round pick. Or if he has all the traits and decent production, then he's a second or third round pick. So it's a constant balance, as I said, between traits and production. Traits and production. I hope you enjoyed today's post. Give me 30 seconds to explain what Patreon is. I subscribe to a couple Patreon thought leaders, and they provide me with all kinds of exclusive content that I find very interesting. And if you follow me, just let me read through a list of some of the things that becoming one of my followers offers. Everything I do all kinds of stuff, radio interviews, clinics, etc. And a lot of times I do all this research for one small group. Well, I've decided to just record a lot of this stuff and just give it to people on my Patreon account because I might as well share it. So I do podcasts. I have a weekly clinic that I'll be doing on here with offensive line drills and football techniques, player evaluations of NFL players and draft analysis, breakdowns of upcoming games that people who are interested in finding the inside breakdowns of what might happen that week, and post-game analysis, football drills, a quarterly question and answer with coaches who have questions about football. I'll do that on Zoom. This is really good. On CoachTube, I've got several courses on football, and I've got over $500 worth of different courses that you can purchase on CoachTube. But if you subscribe to me for a few dollars a month, you get all access to those for free. In certain different levels, you get a copy of that, you get a copy of my book, you get a copy of my CD, you can get one-on-one sessions with me, and I also talk about different hobbies I have. Classical music, art, culture, my travel logs that I do, etc. So go to patreon.com/Coach Paul Alexander and be one of my followers, and I think you'll get all kinds of content which you'll really like.